Pelican Bay State Prison, a place designed to contain those deemed too dangerous for the general population. Walls reinforced with steel, surveillance at every corner, yet control is an illusion. Within these confines, the worst of the worst don't just survive, they adapt, they strategize, they dominate. Among them, a select few rise to the top, not by chance but by force, reputation, and blood. They are more than inmates, they are the architects of a silent war unfolding behind bars. Their influence extends far beyond these walls, reaching into other prisons, onto the streets, orchestrating violence with a single word. Pelican Bay was never meant to rehabilitate. It was built for isolation, a fortress meant to contain those society had long abandoned. The Security Housing Unit, or SHU, is where the system places those it can't control. 23 hours a day, locked inside a windowless cell, no physical contact, no escape from the silence. But for men like these, isolation isn't punishment, it's an opportunity. From inside these cells, they communicate through codes, smuggled notes, and messages passed through shadows. Their network is vast, their orders are absolute. Betrayal is met with death, and hesitation is weakness. The Aryan Brotherhood thrives in these conditions. It is not just a gang, it is a criminal enterprise operating under strict hierarchy and unbreakable loyalty. Membership is earned through blood. There is no way out except through death. From running drug operations to ordering assassinations, these men have turned prison into their empire. Each of them has shaped the Aryan Brotherhood's legacy of violence. Each of them has left a trail of bodies in their wake. Some of their crimes are well documented, others remain buried, known only to those who carry out the orders. By the end, you'll understand why these men are remembered, not for the power they gained, but for the devastation they left behind. Tonight, we count down the 5 most dangerous Aryan Brotherhood members to ever set foot in Pelican Bay. Their names command fear, their actions have defined the gang's ruthless reputation. From enforcers to masterminds, from silent power plays to brutal executions, we start with number 5. David Allen Chance, known among those who feared him as Country or Big Country, was no ordinary inmate. In the world of the Aryan Brotherhood, where strength, loyalty, and brutality determined a man's place, Chance stood at the very top. He wasn't an enforcer, blindly following orders. He was one of the men who gave them, a power broker, a strategist, a man whose word could mean life or death. For over 2 decades, he sat on the Brotherhood's ruling commission, a position few have ever held for as long as he did. He was part of what the gang called the Troika, a 3-man council that had final say over everything, from who lived to who died, to how the Brotherhood operated inside and outside prison walls. Prisons across the country are filled with violent men, but very few ever control anything beyond their own cell. Chance was different. He had influence that extended far beyond Pelican Bay's walls. He was at the center of the Aryan Brothers' California operations, overseeing drug trafficking networks that stretched into multiple states. Heroin, methamphetamine, and prescription pills all moved through a system orchestrated from inside maximum security units, each transaction generating money that kept the Brotherhood strong. But drugs weren't his only business. Power in the AB wasn't about wealth alone. It was about control. Chance understood that better than anyone. The gang ran on discipline. Betrayal was met with swift retaliation. Weakness was eliminated. Those who questioned orders disappeared. Murders were planned from isolation cells, carried out with ruthless precision. In 2002, the US government launched one of the most aggressive crackdowns on the Aryan Brotherhood in history. A federal RICO indictment targeted the gang's highest-ranking members, bringing charges that included murder, attempted murder, extortion, and conspiracy. Among those named were 3 of California's top commissioners, David Allen Chance, Richard Turflinger, John William Stinson. The case was meant to dismantle the AB's leadership, but even behind bars, men like Chance didn't simply fade away. Inside Pelican Bay, a place meant to break the will of the most hardened criminals, Chance remained untouchable. Inmates who knew his name understood what it meant. His status wasn't questioned. His orders were followed. Few could claim to have held a seat on the Aryan Brothers Commission longer than him. The only other man with that distinction was T.D. Bingham, one of the most notorious figures in the gang's history. Those who knew the AB's structure understood holding a position that long wasn't about luck, it wasn't about survival, it was about dominance. Inside his cell, Chance operated like a mafia boss locked in solitary confinement. Messages were sent through smuggled notes, relayed by trusted men who carried his words like a sentence written in stone. Every move, every decision, every act of violence tied back to a chain of command that led to him. The outside world had tried to cut the head off the snake, but in Pelican Bay, the body kept moving, even as federal agents worked to dismantle the Brotherhood's leadership, even as prosecutors lined up witness testimonies in an attempt to put these men away for life. The reality was clear. Chance's legacy was cemented. His influence remained. His name still carried authority. He had become part of the Brotherhood's foundation. Pelican Bay was filled with dangerous men, but few could claim to have shaped the Aryan Brotherhood the way Chance had. His name, his presence, his decisions, they left an imprint that would not disappear with time. And yet, in the power struggles of the AB, no man ruled alone. There were others, equally ruthless, equally feared, standing beside him, men who understood that leadership in the Aryan Brotherhood came at a cost. David Allen Chance was a man of strategy, but the next name on this list belonged to someone who wasn't afraid to challenge the system itself. Someone who didn't just operate within the rules of the prison world, but fought against them in a way that made his presence impossible to ignore. Number 4. Richard Lloyd Turflinger. Richard Lloyd Turflinger was not a man who followed without question. He was an enforcer, a man who knew the rules of the Aryan Brotherhood, but unlike most, he was willing to challenge the authority that governed life behind bars. His reputation was built on violence, but his legacy was cemented in something few prison gang members dared to do. He took his fight beyond the prison yard and into the courtroom. Turflinger's name carried weight among those who knew the structure of the Aryan Brotherhood. He was no outsider, no low-level foot soldier looking to prove himself. He had earned his place through blood and loyalty, enforcing the Brotherhood's law inside some of California's most notorious prisons. Folsom, Pelican Bay, two institutions known for their brutality, for the men they housed, for the wars that played out in their corridors. These weren't places where a man survived without knowing how to navigate power. Turflinger understood the rules. He knew how to command respect, how to maintain order, how to ensure that the Brotherhood's influence was never questioned. Inside the walls of Pelican Bay, control was everything. The Aryan Brotherhood enforced discipline with precision. Men who crossed the line, who disobeyed orders, who failed to carry out their duties were dealt with swiftly. Turflinger was one of the men responsible for making sure those lessons were learned. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. His presence was enough to send a message. A look, a nod, a gesture. It was all it took. In the world of prison politics, where power was maintained through fear and loyalty, he was a man to be respected. But Turflinger's influence didn't stop at the prison gates. He was part of the 2002 RICO indictment, the federal government's most aggressive attempt to dismantle the Aryan Brotherhood's leadership. Alongside David Allen Chance and John William Stinson, he was accused of overseeing the gang's operations, directing acts of violence, and maintaining the Brotherhood's dominance inside California's maximum seclusion prisons. The charges were extensive: murder, drug trafficking, extortion. The government's case against him was built on years of surveillance, intercepted messages, and witness testimonies from former gang members willing to turn on their own. Despite the weight of the charges against him, Turflinger did something unexpected. He fought back, but not in the way most would expect. He didn't rely on gang connections, didn't attempt to intimidate witnesses or silence informants. He took his battle into the legal system, challenging prison policies that he believed violated his rights. His name became known not only among inmates, but also in courtrooms, where he argued against California's gang debriefing policies. The system had long used administrative segregation as a tool to isolate gang members, stripping them of privileges, cutting off communication, locking them away in conditions meant to break their will. But Turflinger didn't break. Instead, he fought back, claiming that prison officials had violated due process by failing to provide him with proper notice of the charges against him. He argued that they had relied on false information to justify his placement in solitary confinement. He challenged the legal procedures that kept men like him locked away indefinitely. His case made it to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, a rare achievement for an inmate branded as one of the most dangerous men in the system. But inside Pelican Bay, legal battles didn't erase history. They didn't erase the violence, the control, the years of enforcing Brotherhood discipline. A man like Turflinger was never forgotten. His role in the Aryan Brotherhood wasn't limited to a courtroom. It had played out in prison yards, in shadowed corners, in cells where decisions were made that determined who walked out alive and who didn't. An inmate steps into the yard, his eyes scanning the faces around him. A message has already been sent. A lesson needs to be taught. No words are spoken. A silent signal is given. In an instant, a shank flashes in the air, and within seconds the act is done. This was the world Turflinger operated in, a world where hesitation was a mistake, where every movement carried meaning, where one wrong decision could end a man's life. Turflinger was a man who enforced rules through blood, but he was also a man who refused to be controlled. His presence in the legal system forced changes in how California prisons handled gang members. His actions inside Pelican Bay reinforced the Brotherhood's authority. He was feared, but he was also a man who proved that power inside these walls could come from more than a knife in the dark. But while Turflinger fought his battles in court, the next man on this list took the war beyond the prison walls. A man whose crimes didn't end with prison politics. A man whose name would forever be tied to an execution carried out in broad daylight. Number 3. Robert Scully. Robert Scully was not the kind of criminal who kept his violence confined to the prison walls. Unlike many Aryan Brotherhood members whose influence remained locked behind steel bars, his crimes bled into the outside world. He was a career criminal, a man who had spent years behind bars, cycling in and out of the system. But one night, after being released from Pelican Bay State Prison, he committed an act so brutal that it sent shockwaves through law enforcement across California. Scully had a reputation. He wasn't the kind of man who avoided trouble, he embraced it. Those who knew him understood that he was a man without hesitation, without remorse. But in 1995, his name became known for something far greater than prison politics. He made national headlines for the murder of Sonoma County Deputy Sheriff Frank Trejo. March 29, 1995, a quiet evening in Sonoma County. A patrol car pulls up outside a small business, headlights illuminating the darkened parking lot. Deputy Trejo steps out. Routine traffic stop. A suspicious vehicle sits in front of the Santa Rosa Saddlery store. Inside that vehicle, Robert Scully. What happened next would be over in seconds, but its impact would last forever. But as Trejo approached, Scully didn't wait for a conversation. There was no argument, no warning. The sawed-off shotgun was already in his hands. A single pull of the trigger, a deafening blast, point-blank execution. The deputy collapsed, his life taken instantly. There was no struggle, no moment of hesitation. Scully and his accomplice Brenda Caymore didn't stop to check if he was dead. They fled the scene, disappearing into the night. For the next 12 hours, the county was on edge. The search for Scully turned into a manhunt. But instead of going into hiding, he escalated the situation further. He forced his way into a nearby house, holding an entire family hostage. A mother, a father, their children, locked inside their own home, terrorized by a man with nothing to lose. Hours passed, negotiations stretched on. Authorities surrounded the house, knowing that any sudden movement could turn this into a massacre. By the time Scully finally surrendered, The damage was already done. A veteran law enforcement officer was dead, a family had spent the night under threat of execution, and California had one more name to add to its list of the most dangerous criminals to walk its streets. In court, Scully didn't deny that he had pulled the trigger. The evidence was undeniable, but his defense team tried to paint a different picture. They argued that the shooting was an accident, that Scully never intended to kill Deputy Trejo, that his years in solitary confinement had fractured his mind, making him paranoid, unstable, unable to distinguish a threat from reality. They brought in psychologists, experts who testified about the effects of isolation in maximum security prisons. They spoke about how long-term confinement in Pelican Bay's security housing unit could break a man, could distort his perception of danger, could turn survival into instinct, but no amount of psychological testimony could change the facts. Scully had been released from prison only 6 days before the murder. He was armed, he was dangerous, he had made a choice, and that choice left a sheriff's deputy dead. The jury did not believe his claims of an accident. They did not see a man broken by the system. They saw a man who had spent his life committing violent crimes, a man who had no hesitation when it came to taking a life. The verdict was swift. First-degree murder, 11 additional felony convictions, a death sentence plus 274 years. The courtroom was silent as the decision was read. There would be no chance for parole, no possibility of freedom. Scully was sent to San Quentin's death row, where he remains to this day. Pelican Bay had produced many violent men, but few had crossed the line the way Scully did. He wasn't content with ruling from inside. He brought his violence to the outside world. He made law enforcement his enemy. And for that, he paid the ultimate price. But while Scully was a killer in the streets, the next man on this list was something different. He didn't need to step outside prison walls to control an empire. He built one from the inside, turning a supermax cell into a command center. His name was feared, his orders were followed, and when he wanted someone dead, it didn't matter where they were. It was only a matter of time. Number 2, Ronald Yandel. Ronald Yandel was the kind of man who didn't need to be seen to be feared. His reach extended far beyond the walls of his prison cell, far beyond the steel doors and surveillance cameras that surrounded him. While most men behind bars counted the years as they passed, Yandel counted the bodies. He was a strategist, a man who built his power not through brute force alone, but through control, intelligence, and a network that operated like a well-run business. The difference? His business was built on murder, drugs, and absolute loyalty. His name was well known in the world of prison politics, but his reputation wasn't earned overnight. Yandel had spent years working his way up the Aryan Brotherhood's ranks, proving himself in ways that left no room for weakness. He was convicted of a double homicide in El Sobrante in 2001, a crime that landed him a 65-year-to-league sentence in California's maximum security system. But if prison was meant to stop him, it failed. His conviction didn't end his criminal career, it expanded it. Locked inside Pelican Bay's security housing unit, Yandel found himself in a position of power. Isolation did not silence him. It gave him the space to operate without interference. He didn't need to be out in the yard to run things. He didn't need to shake hands to make deals. His control came from the connections he had, the alliances he built, and the orders he gave. And those orders were followed without question. A locked cell, a smuggled cell phone, orders whispered in code. Men die because of words spoken through steel bars. This was Yandel's world. In 2015, Yandel orchestrated the murder of Hugo Pennell, a member of the Black Guerrilla family inside California State Prison, Sacramento. He didn't lift a finger. He didn't need to. He made a call. He gave an order. And 2 inmates carried it out, stabbing Pennell repeatedly until there was no life left in him. In return for their loyalty, Yandel promised them membership in the Aryan Brotherhood, a reward paid in blood. Federal agents had been watching, they had been listening, and when they finally moved in on Yandel, they had more than enough to take him down. His voice was caught on intercepted phone calls. He had been recorded talking about how to kill with a prison shank, how to strike fast, how to make sure a man didn't get back up. He bragged about the murders he had ordered. He spoke about violence as if it were a part of daily life, and for him it was. In April 2024, Yandel was convicted of RICO conspiracy, murder in aid of racketeering, and multiple counts of drug trafficking. The charges stacked up, each one cementing his status as one of the most dangerous men ever to sit in a supermax cell. By December of the same year, his fate was sealed. 2 consecutive life sentences in federal prison. No chance of freedom, no possibility of release. But even then, prison officials knew that a man like Yandel was never truly contained. He had spent years proving that a cell was nothing more than a base of operations, that walls meant nothing when a man had enough influence to reach beyond them. He had built an empire from inside Pelican Bay, turning a single phone into a weapon more powerful than any knife in the yard. But if Yandel was dangerous, the man at the top was something else entirely. He didn't just run a part of the Aryan Brotherhood. He was the Aryan Brotherhood. The man who pulled the strings, who dictated the rules, who had shaped the very foundation of the gang itself. Number 1, William Stinson. John William Stinson was not a man who needed to prove himself. His reputation was already cemented, his authority unquestioned. Those who knew the structure of the Aryan Brotherhood understood that men like Stinson didn't rise to power by accident. They didn't survive by luck. They didn't command loyalty through intimidation alone. His name carried meaning. His presence in Pelican Bay wasn't just that of another inmate serving out a sentence. He was a man who ran the entire California Aryan Brotherhood network, one of the highest-ranking leaders the gang had ever seen. Leadership in the Brotherhood wasn't something that was given, it was earned. Stinson had been in the system long enough to understand exactly how things worked. He wasn't reckless, he wasn't impulsive, he operated with intent, moving pieces on the board in a way that kept him in control. Others carried out the violence, but the decisions started with him. He was tied to at least 11 confirmed murders, each one sending a clear message to those who thought about crossing the organization. Drug trafficking, extortion, contract killings. Stinson had a hand in it all. His network stretched beyond Pelican Bay, beyond California, into a system of influence that allowed the Brotherhood to operate without interruption. Money came in, orders went out, people died, and through it all, Stinson remained untouched, orchestrating every move with precision. A man sits in the prison yard, speaking in hushed tones. Every move, every word, deliberate. He doesn't need to lift a finger. Others will do the killing for him. This is John William Stinson. Level of control that made him a target for law enforcement. For years, investigators worked to take down the Aryan Brotherhood's leadership, knowing that to dismantle the gang, they had to remove the men at the top. Stinson was one of them. When the government launched its RICO case, aiming to put the highest-ranking members away for life, Stinson's name was at the center of it, operating a criminal enterprise, ordering murders, running an organization that thrived on violence. The charges were severe, and the evidence was overwhelming. When the verdict came, there was no suspense. He was convicted, multiple life sentences, no parole, no chance of release. The courtroom may have been silent, but the message was loud. Stinson would never walk free again. But for a man like him, a life sentence didn't erase his influence. It didn't erase the years he had spent building his power. Even from behind bars, his influence shaped the Brotherhood's structure, his decisions continuing to ripple through the prison system long after his conviction. Leadership at his level didn't disappear overnight. It left a mark that would not fade. Pelican Bay had housed many dangerous men, but John William Stinson wasn't just another name in the system. He was the embodiment of the Brotherhood's power, the man at the top, the one who dictated who lived and who didn't, the true force behind the Aryan Brotherhood's dominance inside prison walls. Pelican Bay State Prison has housed some of the most dangerous men in America. Men whose crimes extend far beyond these walls. Men who built power through violence, loyalty, and fear. The Aryan Brotherhood is not a gang of impulsive criminals. It is an organization, structured, disciplined, and ruthless. Its leaders are not random inmates looking for survival. They are men who have spent decades controlling everything from drug trafficking to murder. From inside a cell no bigger than a closet, we started with David Allen Chance, a man who ruled from the shadows, holding one of the longest positions of power in the Aryan Brotherhood's commission. He oversaw murder contracts, controlled drug operations, and dictated orders that shaped the gang's stronghold in California's prisons. He understood the importance of control, and for years he maintained it without question. Then came Richard Lloyd, Turflinger, an enforcer who made sure the rules were followed. His role was not about giving orders from a distance. He was the one who carried them out. He operated in a world where hesitation meant weakness, and weakness meant death. But Turflinger was different from the others on this list. He fought not just in the prison yard, but in the courtroom, challenging the system in a way few others ever had. He battled against gang debriefing policies, taking his fight to the legal system while maintaining his role within the Brotherhood. Robert Scully was a different kind of threat, a man who took the war outside prison walls. He didn't wait for orders. He didn't wait for permission. He was released from Pelican Bay, and within days, he committed an execution that would shock law enforcement across the state. The murder of Deputy Frank Trejo was fast, brutal, and without hesitation. He walked free for 6 days before ending a man's life in cold blood, and when it was over, he took a family hostage, stretching the terror out for hours. His conviction was inevitable. His sentence was severe. Death row. No possibility of freedom. No way out. Ronald Yandel never needed to step outside to leave his mark. He controlled the Brotherhood's operations from inside a supermax cell, proving that walls and isolation meant nothing when a man had enough influence. He ordered hits, he moved drugs, he made decisions that sent men to their deaths without ever having to look them in the eye. His phone calls were intercepted, his orders recorded, his voice discussing how to kill effectively, how to make sure a man didn't survive. His conviction sealed his fate. 2 consecutive life sentences, but his role in the Aryan Brothers' empire was undeniable. And at the top of the list, John William Stinson, one of the highest-ranking leaders the Aryan Brotherhood had ever known. He helped run the gang's entire California network. He was tied to at least 11 confirmed murders. He controlled drug trafficking, contract killings, and everything in between. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to act impulsively. He sat in the yard, speaking in hushed tones, and others carried out the violence. When law enforcement made their move, it was with one goal: to take down a man whose power reached beyond Pelican Bay, beyond California, beyond prison itself. His conviction guaranteed he would never be free again. Multiple life sentences, no parole, no escape. But his legacy remained. A reminder that the Brotherhood's grip on the system had never truly been broken. 5 men, 5 different paths to power. Each one played a role in shaping the Aryan Brotherhood's influence in Pelican Bay. Some operated from the inside, some took their violence beyond the prison walls. All of them proved that control inside these maximum security facilities is not always in the hands of prison officials. The question now is, should prisons do more to break these organizations, or is it a losing battle? Are men like this inevitable, or can the system ever truly put an end to their influence? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. Until next time.